for joining us today on today's webinar on common mistakes made by healthcare professionals when trying to help with managing behaviors in children with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder. So I'm just going to go over a couple of common um, things that people don't always look at when they're trying to help you with managing behaviors. So first of all, again, my name is Kathleen Yap. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist and wellness coach. I am a nutrition practitioner. I have finished my nutrition certification specializing in children with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder. Let me just give you a little bit about my disclosure. The information in this webinar is for informational purposes only. I always recommend that you talk with a healthcare professional. We're going to talk a little bit about diets and nutrition supplements, and I always recommend that you, before you start any kind of diet program or you start any vitamin or supplement, you always discuss this with your pediatrician or healthcare professional first. So let's talk a little bit about some common things when you're hitting those roadblocks that you might not have looked into. So the first thing is that when you have child with autism or ADHD or sensory processing disorder, there's always some sort of behavior, and most of the time they are related to some sort of sensory issue. So it's important to identify both what are the sensory seeking and sensory avoiding behaviors, because this is going to help you to identify what the triggers are. A lot of times these behaviors and sensory seeking behaviors are kind of intertwined, and so as you start using sensory strategies to help with managing those behaviors, you're going to have a better idea as far as what's a sensory issue and what's a behavioral issue. And then you can work on addressing them individually. But in the beginning, if you don't really know what's a sensory issue and what's a behavior issue, more than likely, most of the kids are having a typical behavior issue, but it's compiled by the sensory issue. So the behavior might be, I didn't get my way and I'm going to throw a temper tantrum, but the sensory component is that I then can't calm myself down. The other issue might be that they're having a sensory issue like overstimulation, sound, touch, changes to the routine. That's the sensory trigger. And then the behavior then is that they have the meltdown because they just can't cope. And that's where, again, it's hard because a lot of times I deal with parents and they think that it's just a behavior, but it has an underlying sensory component to it. And again, sometimes when they're thinking it's sensory, it really is a behavior, but the sensory part is that they can't calm themselves down. So I tell parents that starting a sensory diet activities are usually very helpful as far as trying to help with determining what is the cause of that behavior. So sensory diet activities can include anything from deep hugs. Some of the biggest things that we do in therapy is, hugs are very, very calming and they're very organizing. So I tell parents, when your child's having a meltdown, try to pick them up, try to give them a big bear hug and squeeze them as hard as you can, and to pat them not lightly, because this doesn't feel so good to a child that's not registering it. You want to be patting them like you're patting them on the back. A lot of times kids will calm right down when you're doing that. If they are withdrawing and trying to pull away, sometimes it could be because they're not registering it enough. It's not intense enough. So I tell parents that sometimes go a little bit firmer than what you would think that they might need and see how that works, because sometimes they just need it to be a little bit more. Great big bear hugs are really good. A lot of my parents will tell me, well, my child they don't like hugs, they pull away. And so I just say to hug them a little bit firmer or a little bit deeper. It's kind of like with us sometimes when you're trying to hold it together, when you're upset about something and you might stiffen up everything and you don't want anybody to come up and hug you because you're afraid that you might completely lose it and you might fall apart. But once somebody gives you that big hug and you allow yourself to relax and melt, then you start crying. It's the same way with some of our kids. They kind of have this, this tension, and they're not wanting the hug because they just don't know how to process it. But if you give it to them in an organized fashion, if you give it to them a little bit firmer, that's going to help them to calm down and melt into it, and they could actually receive the calming effects from it. So I find that with a lot of healthcare professionals that they don't, if you're not trained in sensory integration, a lot of doctors will might just tell you it's a behavior. But therapists that are trained in sensory integration are going to have a better idea on how to help you to determine what's sensory and what's behavior. So that's one of the first things, and just getting somebody that can help you to develop a sensory diet. Strategies for helping develop self-control are something else that's good. I tell parents that sometimes just having a minute to, try to have a quiet space helps kids to be able to regroup. And they can, when you're out in public, especially, or when there's a lot of visual clutter that's going on, they're going to get up and up and up and up and up, and it's really hard for them to calm down. And so, just having a moment for them to be able to go to a quiet corner, that's where timeouts can be effective. Not that they understand what the timeout is, but that break where there's not any visual stimulation, like going in a corner, going in a tent, going and sitting on a couch where there's not any visual stimulation, can help that child sometimes to be able to, bring themselves back down, and it helps to teach them self-control. Visual schedules, I feel like a lot of people overlook what visual schedules, how helpful they can really be. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about, what visual schedules can do. And so visual schedule, um, it's not just, what you would typically see, like for like using pictures. It could be anything. Like most people have a calendar, most adults. And so that's a visual schedule. That helps us to be able to keep organized. That helps us to know what we need to do during the day. When you go to the grocery store, most people write a list. That's a visual schedule. That's a way, it's a strategy that you use to be able to help you to keep organized. And so for some of our kids, it's the same way. They don't know how to organize themselves. And so having a visual schedule helps them to be able to know what the expectations are, what um, what happens next, and it can very helpful as far as for if you line up pictures of we're going to do like for the morning routine. I might have it be get up might not be a picture, but brush teeth, eat breakfast, get dressed, and then go to school. And so for kids, they know that like okay, so once we get up, we have to brush our teeth. Once that's done, they take the Velcro piece off. And then what's next? It's eat breakfast. So after that's done, they take the eat breakfast picture off. And then what's next? The get dressed picture is on. So they take off the picture for getting dressed. And then they know, okay, now it's time to go to school. And so for some of these kids, some of our kids, it really does help to have a visual schedule to help them to know what to expect. And so it helps with transitions, especially if you have a child that has a hard time transitioning from one activity to the next. A visual schedule can be very effective because once the picture goes away, it's all done. And then they automatically know that there is something that's coming next. Versus if we just say, okay, it's done, then they're just falling apart and they don't really know that there is something else to transition to. And so visual schedules, I feel like, are they're overlooked a lot, and I think that they can be very helpful for many children that can benefit from it. And there's very different ways that you can do it, and I have another teaching on that I can talk about later on how effective visual schedules can be in helping managing behaviors. Um, the next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is diet and food additives, and this is something that the mainstream doctors don't always talk about. And so I am going to have to read from this a little bit because there is quite a bit of information. And so when we think about diet, it's not just I have a lot of parents who will say I already have a picky eater. I don't want to start my child on a special diet, and that's fine. A special diet doesn't mean that you need to be gluten free, casein free. That has been shown to decrease some behaviors in children with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder, but it doesn't have to be the first step. And so I feel like parents sometimes are turned off on that because they think that they can't do it. And so I usually try to take a look at what the child's eating and then trying to see what the problem foods are. And so some of the big things are food additives. And so let me talk about what food additives are. So food additives are substances that are added to food to preserve flavor or to enhance taste. There are substances added to food to preserve flavor or enhance its taste or appearance. So basically, that is what makes your Cheetos look very orange or your Jello look very red. It makes it, when they did their testing for marketing purposes, they found that foods that are brighter in color have more taste appeal. And so that's what the companies have done. They added these food additives to the foods to make it, taste better and to make it a little bit more visually appealing. But what was overlooked as the side effects that it has on some of our children. So food dyes are one of the more popular um, food additives that you hear a lot about. And there's a lot of study out there that just shows about how certain dyes will increase hyperactivity in children with autism, ADHD, or sensory processing disorder. It can cause more hyperactivity. It can cause aggression. It can cause attention issues. But there are other food additives that may also cause issue. And so we're going to talk a little bit about like glutamate additives, because these are foods that are hidden sources of glutamates, and these can also have a profound effect on behaviors and mood in children. So let me see if I can find my little paper that talks a little bit about. So not all glutamates are bad. First of all, there are some glutamates that are found naturally in some foods that are fermented and in bone broth. So not all glutamates are bad, but glutamates are found in MSG, modified food starch, certain sauces, condiments, citric acid, just anything that's a food preservative. And it's not going to say glutamate, but it might be in the form of MSG. Um, but those are things that you want to really take a look at, because these food additives can cause hyperactivity, irritability, defiant behaviors, sleeping issues, gut issues, diarrhea, constipation, and it can cause salivary reactions, which include red cheeks, red ears. I don't know if you've ever had, for some people, if they eat something that's high in phenols or amines, their cheeks might get really flushed right after eating it. Or their ears might get really hot, or their feet might start to burn. They might get skin rashes. Again, they might have aggression, and they might start to have night wetting or day wetting, and they might start to have almost like allergic reactions to the foods, such as respiratory issues. And so these might not necessarily be a food intolerance. It might be a glutamate intolerance, which is an intolerance to some of the food additives that are in some of the foods. And so I mention this to parents because sometimes it's not a matter of going on a special diet. Sometimes it's just taking a look at the back of the label on the processed foods and trying to switch from processed foods to more whole foods, or just at least looking, if you are doing processed foods, trying to do ones with more natural ingredients. And so there are lists of what the different, glutamates are. I have that right here. But for the glutamates, because those can definitely contribute to some of the different behaviors. And so sometimes just by removing some of those food additives, you might see a significant improvements in behaviors. And again, I feel like this sometimes gets lost by the doctors. They don't always mention it because they're not always trained in this. When I have some friends that are doctors, and they learn a very little bit about nutrition as far as for what constitutes a balanced diet, but they don't really understand, you know, all the problems that food additives and some of the different ingredients in food, how it can affect some people. Um, the last thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is nutritional deficiencies, and how that can really affect a child's behavior. So sometimes you might have a child that eats really well, but sometimes the therapeutic levels of certain vitamins might not always be absorbed from food alone, or if you're a picky eater, you're not going to be getting all the nutrition that you need from food. And so in these cases, supplementing with good, high quality absorbable multivitamins might really help as far as for um, getting the nutrition that you need. It might improve gut health, and it might also improve brain function. So a lot of parents and research studies have showed that when they've been supplementing, that that they've seen improvements in behavior, cooperation, sensory issues in their children, and that can make it easier then to develop. You might start to see behaviors improvement in behaviors in other areas. It might make it easier for them to learn. It might make it easier for them to transition. It might make it easier for them to develop language if they are nonverbal. Um, and so there are so many different supplements. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I just want to kind of give you an idea as far as for certain deficiencies, what it can look like and how it can contribute to behavior. So magnesium is one deficiency. It's a very common deficiency, and it's needed for over 350 biomedical reactions in the body. And so if you're deficient in magnesium, you might see hyperactivity, impulsivity, distractibility, impulsivity, muscle spasms, poor sleep, night terrors, emotional reactivity, irritability, aggression, and constipation. So magnesium is something to think about as far as, if supplementing. And again, I want to mention that before you start supplementing, you're always going to want to talk to a doctor, because some supplements you're not going to want to start without doing testing first to find out what the blood levels are. And not all supplements are appropriate for all age groups as well. Certain supplements are going to interact with other supplements. So it's always beneficial to talk to a doctor first. I'm just going over these to give you an idea on how certain deficiencies can contribute to behavior. Vitamin D deficiency is something else that can contribute to certain behaviors. It can affect cognitive development and immunity, as well as your skin. And so vitamin D deficiency can contribute to developmental delays. It can contribute to learning disabilities. It can also cause eczema. It can cause skin issues like chapped lips. It can cause, bone issues as well, such as rickets. And it can also affect your immunity, so you might see frequent infections. And so something to think about is that when you are taking vitamin D, you want to make sure that you are getting adequate vitamin A. Zinc deficiency, if you're deficient in zinc, it can contribute to picky eating behaviors, poor eye contact. It can also contribute to pica, which is when kids are eating things that are not edible. They might go eat dirt. They might be eating metal, pencils. They might be eating paper. And so most of the time, pica has been related to zinc deficiency. Zinc deficiency can also contribute to sensory processing disorder and other sensory issues. It can contribute to speech delays or auditory processing disorder, low muscle tone, and it can also cause difficulty excreting toxic metals. And I also want to note, because I'm an occupational therapist, I'm also a feeding therapist, that supplementing zinc has also been shown to decrease picky eating behaviors in children, because zinc deficiency has also been shown to actually change the taste of certain foods. And so for some kids, supplementing in zinc has made it so that they have a better appetite and they're more willing to try new foods. So omega-3 fatty acids, a deficiency, well, DHA is critical for brain development. And so if you're not getting enough DHA, it can contribute to developmental delays, language delays, cognitive function, mood, behavior issues, and other attention issues. So that's just a little bit about, as far as some of the vitamin deficiencies. There are lots of different supplements that people with autism, ADHD, or sensory processing disorder might consider. And these include calcium, DMG, and TMG. This raises glutathione levels, which helps with the detoxification process and also can help with speech production. Enzymes, digestive enzymes help with digestion. Um, Folic acid, folate, or folinic acid helps with the oxidative stress and glutathione and methylation. And that's also something that you want to consider, because if there are certain genetic issues where you shouldn't be taking folic acid, you want to be making sure that you're taking folate in the form of methylfolate versus folic acid. Iron is something that you want to be careful of. It's not recommended in younger children, and you really are only going to supplement with iron if there's a deficiency. Magnesium has been shown to help with sleep and anxiety. Melatonin has been helpful in sleep. Probiotics help with immune and gut function. Vitamin A can help with supporting the thyroid. Vitamin D helps with the immune system and is also anti-inflammatory. Vitamin B6 is something that's commonly used in children with autism or ADHD and sensory processing disorder. It helps again with glutathione neurotransmitter support. It can be very calming. It's a B vitamin that is neurologically calming. B12 is something that's also very commonly given in children with sensory issues, because it can be neurologically calming as well. Those are just some of the common vitamins. There's so many more, but again, these are things that you can talk about with your doctor, or your therapist or your nutrition coach. And so, because these are some different things that might be helpful, adding some of these different supplements to your child's regimen. Most of the ones that I mentioned, you don't have to worry about overdosing. There are other supplements that you do need to make sure that you're doing testing for. And then the last thing I want to just talk about is some of the healing diets that are out there, because, I don't think that doctors always go into some of the benefits that some of these healing diets can have. And so the gluten-free, casein-free diet is one of the easiest diets to begin. It does remove, gluten and casein or dairy products from the diet. but it can be very helpful in reducing gut inflammation and digestive issues. And it has, because gluten and dairy both can contribute to opioid complexes, which can contribute to your self uh, addiction like behaviors in children. Um, the grain-free diets help with also other gut inflammations. The body ecology diet can be good for children that have gut issues, such as the um, body ecology diet is also very good for kids that have um, that crave sugar, and so it helps with reducing inflammation in the gut and getting rid of candida. And a low oxalate diet, because a lot of children with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder do have difficulty with oxalates. So oxalates are something that are found in food, um, naturally in food. And if you have a hard time with oxalates, then they're going to build up and that can contribute to pain and inflammation in the body. And so sometimes just considering decreasing the amount of oxalates in food might also help with managing behaviors. So again, these are a quick, this is just a quick little webinar on just giving you some different ideas on ways that might be helpful in managing behaviors in children that are sometimes overlooked by mainstream medicine. If you would like more information, feel free to contact me for a free consult at www.kathleenyopp, KATHLEENYOPP.com/heal and sign up for your free consult. I look forward to talking to you. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you found this information helpful. Bye-bye.